Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One item tonight, discuss the wastewater treatment plant, phosphorus feasibility, discharge optimism, and facility plan project presented by Benton Associates. James?
We got Jack, please.
All right,
We're going to start.
Yeah.
Just shut the lights off here real quick.
Go do it.
So this PowerPoint presentation is basically, the sewer industry is facing some new challenges down the road. We will not be treating our sewage the same way in a few years as we do now because of the changes in what the EPA requires. So we have to do these studies. We have a lot of infrastructure at the sewer plant that needs to be changed with these changes, plus a lot of infrastructure that is beyond its life expectancy. So, but we're, like we brought to you before, we're trying to keep maintaining what we have because we know the way we're going to treat sewage is going to change, and these pieces that we use now won't be feasible, but we're going to spend the least amount of money we can to get to the point where we start treating it differently. But the EPA is pretty much in charge of that. The timeline is a few years out, but you have to start planning now. So, okay.
I'm going to try to interject a little bit here. Real quickly, Cameron Jones is going to be a big part of the presentation tonight. He's one of our process engineers related to wastewater treatment. This is very much focused on wastewater treatment. Cameron's been directly involved in the design and planning of phase 2 improvements at the Beardstown Sanitary District locally here, pretty close to $11 million in improvements over a period of years. Cameron was also directly involved in the planning and design of a capital improvement program for $30 million worth of improvements in Kentucky. We worked with Jim Haggerty, who works with our firm as a specialty senior process person down there on the Kentucky project. We actually ended up designing a new regional wastewater treatment plant along with Jim Haggerty. Jim is actually had planned to be here for the meeting when it was going to be last night, but of course we had to schedule for tonight for reasons that nobody wishes had to happen. But Jim actually has over 30 years of experience. He's actually done work in multiple states, as well as actually lived and worked in Thailand for a while on wastewater treatment. So, and of course we have Jamie Hedden, the principal in charge of our water and wastewater, both directly involved in this project. And so tonight's presentation is to kind of introduce this subject that Jack just talked to you about.
We're going to go through some of this fairly quickly, not to minimize any of it, but in interest of time this evening. So if you have any questions as we go along, like normal, throw your hand up, holler out. We'll just briefly look at the history of the wastewater treatment plant, kind of go over the large components, kind of remind what the steps of the process of wastewater, and then the NPDES permit requirements. As Jack mentioned, there's a permit that says all the rules of how you can discharge waters that are treated into the state. And those change every 5 years when the permit's being renewed. And we've been working with Jack over the last 3 to 5 years or so, kind of thinking about some of these changes related to phosphorus, ammonia, some of the other keywords that you'll hear. And we've been developing a larger data set to be able to have you guys ready to this point. And now there's a draft permit that we're getting ready to be issued probably in the next month or so, and that's really setting the requirements forward that we're looking at now. So facility planning and phosphorus reports part of that, so we'll talk about how to implement that and take it from there. A little bit of history. Started wastewater treatment in the early 30s. And then constructed the existing plant here in 1971. Probably a lot of you remember the late 80s upgrades to the treatment plant, which kind of set the tone for where you are today regarding treatment. In the 90s, there was CSO facilities, combined sewer overflow. So when you have your normal plant flow coming in, that's normal sewage. When you have large combined sewers, you have enormous flows coming in the plant, and the requirement to treat that is becoming more and more important. And then really in the 2000s, over the last 15 years or so, it's been more kind of staying the same, but sort of taking care of storm sewer separation projects out in the collection system, and at the treatment plant kind of keeping pace and replacing really what's needed to make sure we can comply with our permit requirements. kind of what's our scorecard as far as capacity of the treatment plant. Right now, our average daily flow is around 5 MGD. We have a design average flow of around 7.5, so we're about 68% capacity. There's sometimes when it's really dry, it will be about 3 million gallons per day in the plant, and then we can spike all the way up to 13, 14 MGD. You can kind of see how throughout the year it really varies a lot depending on wet weather flows. Generally speaking though, the average is somewhat trending down with the advent of the reduced flow of toilets and the water conservation measures becoming more important to the average homeowner. The general residential flow is down, but also we've had, like with AC Homeco and some of those, not just leave, but also try to have water conservation as more of a priority to reduce costs of their operations. So I'll let Cameron kind of go through the steps of the treatment process.
So like Jamie said, I'm going to walk you through the treatment plant as it is today and kind of try to explain what each process does. So pay attention to this map. I got all the numbers on there, stepping 1 through 8, walking you through the treatment plant. Each slide will have a different number as we go across. It helps if I turn the thing on. So we're starting out in the headworks and the influent pumping. The existing influent comes through an outdoor screen, which they have problems with freezing sometimes in the winter, and it goes into a bucket on wheels, and they roll it over to the solids handling room, and they go up on the second floor with a hoist, and then they dump it into the dumpster. So that's just the headworks. And then they pump it through an aerated grit chamber, which helps settle out the grit, and it goes through a separator and into a dumpster. So that's the first part of the headworks. And over here we have the solids handling building. So they go up here and dump on the second floor into the dumpster, and then the grit comes into the dumpster there too. And this is the aerated grit removal system. Second, we go into the primary clarifier. It is a fairly large clarifier. So you can see up here, there's only one of them. And when they get large flows, it can fill up with sludge fairly quickly. And it has, when I was there today, they had stuff floating on top that they'd had come down the collection system. So it's one primary that when it needs to be taken down to clean, they have to back up their sewer or figure out a way to bypass it. Secondary treatment is their aeration tanks. You currently have 6 of them, which is great because it gives us flexibility for future changes or different techniques. We've got a picture of the aeration grid when they head it down for cleaning, and then a picture of the top with all the air on. You can see it mixing real well. Then we go into final clarifiers. There's 2 final clarifiers, and they were done in the 88 expansion, and they have some parts missing that have fallen off over the years that aren't necessarily important today, but maybe in the future. And then in the building in between is where the non-potable water pumping system is, and all of the sludge pumping system for the post-aeration side of the treatment plant, and it pumps sludge from the bottom of the clarifiers back into the aeration tanks and then over to the sludge management system. Then next we go to disinfection. Down here we got chlorine gas in these buildings, in that building, and then we introduce the chlorine into those tanks, and that gets contact with the bugs and kills everything before it gets sent to the creek. Then we go to the effluent pumps. When the creek is down, it gravity flows out to the creek. When the creek comes up, they close the gate, and then they pump it out to the creek. Then we move on to the sludge management side, which is almost as big as the water side. We just went through the water side going out to the creek. Now we're going to talk about all the sludge or all the stuff that we take out of the water. It's in very variable levels of age, and So this is where we had started looking at things. This is the non-potable pump system, sludge thickening for the waste activated sludge. See, it's overflowing because it has that much water coming in. And then this is the heat exchanger, the insulation falling out of it. The sludge thickening and pumping and heating system. The whole treatment plant site, all the buildings are heated on a hot water system that comes off of these digesters. These digesters create gas, and the gas is burned in some boilers, which both heat the digester again and heat the hot water system so that we can heat all the buildings. Currently, we're in the process of looking at how to get those off of that system because it's leaking pretty well, and trying to make it more efficient. Also in there are pumps and thickeners to send it over to their sludge storage where they store for most of the year, and then they send it to the farm fields to be land applied. Next, we're going to talk about the Cso Treatment Train. We have some storage tanks and a big clarifier. And then from the clarifier, it goes up. Chlorine is introduced and is sent to these contact tanks that were improved a few years back. And this is to try and bring primary treatment to that stormwater flow that we see peak flow on. So we talked about the NPDES permit. Jack talked about new limits and new things and all this other stuff. So what is an NPDES permit? It's a national pollution discharge elimination system. So it is a permit for your point in the stream, and what can you put into that stream. So it's US EPA telling Illinois EPA what they need to regulate, and the permit is how they regulate you. So every 5 years they come out with a new permit, and that new permit will take into account all of the things that have changed regulatorily wise in that time period, and that's how they control what you do in your treatment plant. So new to this NPDES permit, we have a draft, and there'll be a public notice draft coming out in the next month or two. And so these are some of the things that are in that draft permit. The dark bold letters are the ones that are new to this permit, and the thin letters are the ones that are just, they were in the permit before, but they are still going to cause you to do some sort of action. So we got change in their winter ammonia limit, still going to be able to meet it with the existing treatment, but it reduced the limit slightly. They've got new nickel limits, new zinc limits, both of which they've been meeting fine, even though they didn't have a limit before. Changes to their reporting for their industrial users, toxicity testing, O&M plan. It's not something that they don't already have, just have to do a public hearing related to it. Sewer use ordinance review, they want you to review your ordinance every 5 years just so you're keeping it up to date with new, how people are treating their waste and all sorts of things like that. Some new post-construction monitoring requirements, an update to the CMOM plan, and then the bottom ones are the ones we're really going to talk about in detail from here on out. We've got a discharge optimization plan related to phosphorus and a feasibility study related to phosphorus. And then phosphorus limits that aren't going to be implemented today, but will be in the next 10 to 20 years, mattering on what kind of treatment process you use.
And Cameron, this permit's not just picking on City of Jacksonville.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
There's many other communities in your same size that are getting a lot of the same requirements. Some has to do with the receiving stream, but generally speaking, broad brush, a lot of these requirements are coming down, and they're issuing them kind of in waves over the next, few months or so?
Yeah. This winter, EPA decided that they were going to implement these permit limits. The last one I listed before. And they had decided that, but they had been holding all of the permits for all the people that discharge more than 1 million gallons for a good year, year and a half, 2 years. So they had when they decided that they were gonna put that limit in, they had 200 permits almost sitting on their desk waiting to be sent out. So everyone in that stack is getting that limit. It's just how quickly can they get it out the door. So this month in May, they started sending those permits out. And when I talked to the regulator, he said, you're on the list, you're just not the first one on the list. So we'll be getting that permit here in June or July time period. But like I said, you're not alone. Everybody's getting this limit down here. And they're also getting these optimization plans and feasibility studies. Now the big boys, the really big treatment plants, already got these plans and studies in their last permit. It's now everybody in 1 million gallons and up are getting them. So the discharge optimization plan is looking at your entire system, collection, treatment, everything, and figuring out, okay, what can we do to your existing system to reduce phosphorus without costing you really any capital money. So it's going to your industrial, your commercial, your restaurants, your laundromats, and figuring out, okay, do they have a phosphorus load that they can reduce on their site before it gets to you? Is there something in your collection system somewhere that is giving you phosphorus that you didn't know about that you can reduce it there? Is it something that you can just turn off and turn something else on in your existing treatment plant that you weren't doing before and operate it a little differently? Or was there an entire process in your treatment plant that you weren't using? That's what the optimization plan is looking at. And then once you identify those things, okay, what limits do you have to give your customers to make sure they're not giving you high loads? Or a number of other things as you go down the list. So that's what the optimization plan is looking at. What can you do with what you have? Then the feasibility study is saying, okay, if day one we gave you a 1 milligram per liter limit, or a 0.5 milligram per liter limit, or 0.1 milligram per liter limit, there's a big difference between those. What would you have to do in capital costs to your existing treatment plant or system now? So if you do, I'll go through in a minute what each of those treatment processes might look like, but it's more of a, how much is it going to cost? How much time do you need to do it? You're going to do it kind of thing, but just tell us how much time you need. So then the phosphorus limit is where they kind of skipped this step and said, okay, never mind, you're all going to get a 0.5. But matter in which process you decide to use and which one fits in your existing treatment plant footprint or capital expense, what time period are you going to have to do? And these dates might be subject to change in the next permit cycle, but at this point that's the numbers they're sticking with. So figuring out those in this study is where we're trying to get to. So why do we have this phosphorus limit? Phosphorus, everything wants phosphorus to grow. It's in your DNA, it's in your bones, it's in plants, it's in meat, it's in all sorts of things. But algae loves it. And if you get algae in your stream, algae takes all the oxygen out of your stream and all your fish die. So that's one of the problems we're running into. So it can impair the stream you're going into, you can impair the rivers you're going into, but the major one that has really gotten national attention is Gulf of Mexico dead zone down here south of Louisiana. It's a 5,000 square mile area where there's almost zero oxygen in the water, and so nothing's living there. There's giant algae blooms, and they're having a real issue. It's because all the nitrogen and phosphorus coming off farm fields and treatment plants and everywhere and anywhere going into the Mississippi River and coming out and floating through the Gulf. So that's what they're trying to reduce, and farm fields are harder to regulate than you are, so that's why you're getting a pretty low limit right now, and other people are getting even lower limits. So phosphorus in your customers, where is it found? It's in fertilizers, it's in meat, vegetables, all these different things that are growing because it bonds with different things to grow. So it bonds with calcium to help grow in your bones and things like that. So it's not something you can easily just doesn't come in anymore. So when we're looking at removal techniques, we got 3 main removal techniques. If we're looking at a 1 milligram per liter, we'll probably look at a biological removal. Now, with a biological removal, you're trying to make the bugs happy so they eat more phosphorus. Really, you're trying to starve them so they eat more phosphorus, but it's in the details. So, biological is great. It doesn't cost you much. Just kind of change how you're running your tanks. Chemical is where it starts, adding up quickly. Chemical is 0.5. Not saying you can't get biological to come down to 0.5, but that's more of a site-specific kind of deal. But when you get into chemical, you're adding chemical to settle out the phosphorus, and you're taking your sludge production, multiplying it by 4. That you already have more sludge than you know what to deal with, so take it times 4, and you're definitely not going to know what to deal with it. So, as little chemical as you can do, the better. But the lower the limit gets, the more chemical you have to add. And then when you get down to a 0.1, you're looking at micron level results. So you have to put in filters with a chemical in front of it after you've already done all the other processes and filter that water down before it goes to the creek.
And to put it in context with what the phosphorus levels are at the plant now, you're anywhere in the range from 2 to 8 milligrams per liter, and the new loading is trying to get down to 1 milligram per liter. So we currently aren't at the levels that are being required.
So, got a lot of things to cover in the facility plan and phosphorus studies through from data collection all the way to analysis. It's just like any facility plan, it just involves a little more of the process modeling and the evaluation of inputs and collection. Now schedule, we're looking at a schedule. So we're looking at a facility plan update in 2019 with potential improvements in the 2020 to 2030 range because we're shooting for that biological removal in date of 2030 for the phosphorus level. So summary, we got equipment deficiencies at the wastewater treatment plant that mandate replacement. We didn't go a lot into the age in the presentation, as Jack covered. There's a lot of stuff that's getting to their end of their useful life, and instead of replacing in kind, we're looking to replace in relation to what's coming. The challenge of the new permit requirements is great, so we're trying to study to make sure that we attack it the right way and we're not throwing money at bad things. Multiple long-term treatment options are needed in this evaluation, and they all affect each other. So I can't go and replace the sludge system without having to factor in the phosphorus removal. And smart investment choices today equals lowest long-term costs. So
I've seen stories about some towns doing artificial wetland. Is that something that's feasible or?
that is one of the options in the list of phosphorus removal techniques. The one drawback on the artificial wetlands is the scale of it.
Scale
To meet
of
your
water.
treatment flow has to be very large. It'll definitely be one that is evaluated in the process.
And it is used a lot by smaller or medium-sized communities as an effective choice. But it will be evaluated as part of this study as well.
Yep.
I guess
Is there any funding available for any of this?
Yes, and that's an important point. The action item that's on the city council's agenda is actually the facility planning process. We are only starting the facility plan, but they do very much have principal forgiveness and launcher loans, somewhat similar to what you were using on other water system and wastewater system projects in the past.
I guess I got a comment on a facility plan question. First, the opening of the new drinking water plant was great. I loved Jack's speech. He did a really good job. And one of the things going back to the reason we had to do the drinking water plant was we had a flood. The existing sewer plant's also in the flood, is in the floodplain, and has levees around it. So how close was the sewer plant in terms of height or flooding to being impacted by that flood that took out the water plant? And how's that being handled in the facility planning process?
That'll be reviewed as part of the facility planning process, but if you remember, we actually made improvements to the entrance road as a result of that flood event. That certainly is the flood of record, but we'll take a look at the freeboard and make sure that it's an appropriate level of protection, Steve, to kind of address that concern.
Was
It
it
is-
close before? Or?
It was close.
It was close.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was.
And another part, the sewer plant versus the water plant, if it floods, it's bad either way. The consequence of the flooding, can the sewer collection system and discharge, system operate in a high water level as opposed to the water plant where there was no water going in the system for a while. So it is very good to look at that. The effect of what happens to it might be slightly different, but it's still something we want to take a look at for sure.
We appreciate your time and apologize for the length of it.